Storytelling should evoke an emotional response in the person that the story is being told to. And there's no difference for writers than there would be for any other medium of storytelling. If you cannot get your readers to invest in your characters, then there won't be an emotional connection. So to do that, to provide that emotional connection, the whole point of a story, the whole point of storytelling is really to evoke an emotional response. If you don't have this emotional response, then you don't have a story. You just have words on a page. So there are certain scenes in books that I love that really invoke these emotions, and I want to talk to you about those scenes. And then we'll talk about what makes those scenes so emotional and what provides that connection. So the first scene, I'm a fantasy guy, so I'm going to be giving fantasy examples mostly. The first scene I want to talk about is from the Stormlight Archive. So I'll be talking about the Stormlight Archive and Name of the Wind. If you haven't read those and you want to read those, feel free to skip ahead. But for now, let's jump into the Stormlight Archive. So the Stormlight Archive has a scene where Dalinar and Adolin are fighting for their lives after they've been betrayed by Sadeas, and they're left hanging on a plateau with chasms all around them, and they can't get to the neighboring plateau. So they're fighting for their lives against the Parshendi, and the emotional scene really happens when they are saved by the bridge crew, by Bridge 4 and Kaladin and his group of guys. And there's a few reasons why I think that this scene works so well and provides that emotional connection. The first one being, you have two very highborn lords, Adolin and Dalinar, who are in a vulnerable spot. You see how vulnerable they are. They need outside help to survive. And if they don't get that outside help, they are going to die. So that's the first one. You cannot have connection without some sort of vulnerability. Something else that makes this scene so perfect is the build-up with the bridge crew and their hatred of those that are higher stations than they are. And I think that hatred is actually pretty well founded considering all that they have to do and deal with, especially being under Sadeas. So, I mean, they're sent basically to die. So their hatred, again, well founded. But they're able to put that aside and do what they know is right and save Dalinar and Adolin, not because they know that they're going to be rewarded, but because they know that it's the right thing to do. And I think that is super important in creating this emotional scene. The build-up, that's what's really important. Let's move on to the next example with Name of the Wind. There are countless scenes that I could talk about from Name of the Wind that gave me a really emotional response. But I think that the most important, not the most important, but one of my favorite scenes to talk about is the scene where Kvothe gets his pipes. So that scene is really emotional because, again, the build-up. To really understand that scene, you have to go back towards the beginning of the story. When his parents died or were killed, and when his whole troop was really killed, that's when this emotional scene was born. Because Kvothe took his father's lute and he learned to play it because that's how he felt close to his family, to his father and his mother and his troop, because they were all musicians. And that's really the genesis of that later scene where Kvothe wins his pipes. And I say that because Kvothe plays that lute so much after his parents died that's really all he did for weeks, maybe months, until the strings broke. And when one string broke, he continued to learn how to play with that broken string, which comes into play later when he wins his pipes. But that scene where he's playing and breaks the strings, eventually more and more strings break to the point where it pushes him into town because that's all he wants to do is play his lute. That's the driving force that gets him up and moving, is he wants to go buy replacement strings. So, and that's also the build up for this emotional scene where he wins his pipes, because as he's playing his song, a string breaks and he's able to push through and play the song beautifully with one less string because he had practiced that earlier on in the story. The build up in that scene is crucial for the emotional connection that the audience feels with Kvothe, and therefore that the readers feel with the story. Another reason that scene works is because by that time we really care for Kvothe. If we didn't care for Kvothe, it would be like a game show contestant that you don't really like or don't really want to. Sometimes you just want them to get on with the show, you know? If you watch American Idol or if you watch The Voice or America's Got Talent, they always do these little clips of the people who are about to perform because they're trying to provide an emotional connection between that person and the audience, because that makes for a better story. But if you don't care about that person, then it really doesn't matter. Just get on with the performance, you know? That's what people really want. So, and that's how readers will feel about your story if they aren't connected with your characters. So, that's important for your characters to have experiences that the readers can identify with and connect with. So let's go over some tips and tricks for creating this emotion. The first one I can think of is to use music. I like to listen to fantasy music as I write because it really gets me in the mood, but it really depends on the scene that I'm writing. Sometimes I'll throw on some Lord of the Rings for some of those heavier scenes because the Lord of the Rings soundtrack has a lot of dark songs on it. And so if I'm writing something evil or dark, then sometimes I'll throw that on. But music can really help invoke emotion in you, which in turn you can dump into your characters, which is important for creating emotional connection with your readers. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, emotions are a function of conflict and tension. It's the setup that I was talking about with both Bridge 4 and with The Name of the Wind. The setup needs to provide emotional tension. There needs to be some sort of desire that the character has and something standing in the way of what that character wants for that emotional connection to take place. If your character wants to find love and it were easy for them to find love, like if they found it on page 1 of your story, you don't have a story. All right, your character, if you want that story, you need to have your character, maybe they're really good at finding partners, but there's some sort of thing that they do that gets in their own way, or there's some sort of external force that is causing them to not actually be able to find love. Maybe it's something else, or maybe they think it's love. There needs to be some sort of barrier, a barrier to entry. If you don't have that, you don't have a story. You don't have the emotion. Another important thing is to show your character's emotions rather than telling your reader what your character is feeling. If your character is sad, your reader needs to realize that they are sad. Not by... Okay, let me rephrase that. If your character is sad, the reader doesn't need to be told that they're sad. Instead, your character needs to do things that show that they are sad. If your character is really mopey or seeking love in the arms of someone that they shouldn't be, that they know that they shouldn't be, that's a sign that something is wrong. But it's also something that people can relate with and emotionally connect to and with. Another tip is that sometimes emotions are easier, these emotional scenes are a lot easier to set up in a second draft, because the second draft is when you have a full picture of what's going on in your story. It's really like going back to the 90s and dumping all your money in Amazon or Apple or Tesla. I realize that Tesla wasn't around then, but the point is, if you can see the future, you can set things up how you need them to be to create that emotional connection. And books are great because you can actually do that. You know the whole story in advance, and you're the only one who knows it in advance. When your reader reads the story, it will be for their first time, even though you've written it probably 3 or 4 times, or way more than that, and you've read it so many times. It's their first time reading it, so they'll just think that you're a genius if you do it well. The last tip I have for you is to draw on your personal experiences. Think of the last time you were sad. How did you act? Think about the last time you were mad. How did you act? And then think about what put you in that mood. All right, well, you weren't mad for no reason. Somebody cut you off in traffic. But why did that send you over the edge? Were you just having a bad day? Or was there something else that happened? Or was it just that, you know? Once you know, we're all human. We have these feelings, and we can reverse engineer them to figure out how to best implant those feelings into our characters and therefore into our readers. Those are my tips and tricks for you. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, hit the like and subscribe button. And if you want to get my full thoughts on this subject, I have a post on my website. You can use the link in the description below, and yeah, let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.